Okay, so now I'd like to introduce and then turn the meeting over to our speaker. He's Texas Nature Trackers biologist, Craig Hensley. Craig is well known in these parts as the former park ranger for Guadalupe River State Park and Honey Creek State Natural Area. He's also well known to the youth who now have grown up in the area. We here in Guadalupe have enjoyed many of his previous presentations on local flora and fauna, and tonight, hopefully we'll get the best of both. He now serves as one of two of Texas Nature Trackers biologists, and hopefully he'll tell us what that means. And he's with the Wildlife Diversity Program. He is married to our master naturalist, Terry Lashley, and the father of two children. So with that, Craig, if I've missed anything, please add to it. You're up.
All right. You can hear me okay? Yes?
I can hear you.
Perfect. That's all I need to know.
I'm the only one not muted.
Right. Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. And also, Bill, thank you for getting us all coordinated with the format and all this good stuff. So I want to first thank Bill for the opportunity to speak to you all tonight. And what we're going to try to do is cover a lot of ground in a short period of time, relatively short period of time. But one of the things that I've been working on at my home, Terry and I have been working on taking a typical suburban yard in Boerne, Texas, that was mostly St. Augustine grass, and actually trying to apply all of those ideas about how you restore an urban or suburban yard into something that's more natural. And I had lots of ideas for titles for this presentation. One of them was taking a biological desert and turning it into something else, but I didn't use that one. So it wasn't quite a biological desert, but darn close. So anyway, so there's several things I want to do tonight. I want to just briefly introduce you to Texas Nature Trackers program. Those of you that have heard me speak before in the last year or so have heard it, the spiel, but we'll keep it short tonight. And then I also want to spend a good chunk of time talking about how we did our restoration, and it's when I say did, it's ongoing, but how we've proceeded through that, and then show you some of the results of that success, and then also introduce to you how we actually using Inaturalist, which is a program I do a lot of trainings with people around the state of Texas on, how we use that to actually keep records of what we're seeing so we can actually measure our success over time. And then also give you an overview of some of the important pollinator plants that we've chosen for our area in the Boerne area, and then try to have some time for some questions. So we will just get right into it. First of all, Texas Nature Trackers program we are part of the Wildlife Diversity Program in the Wildlife Division of TPWD. Our small team is called the Community Stewardship and Engagement Team. And that includes, if any of you are master naturalists, you know Michelle Haggerty, she's my supervisor. So we work with the Master Naturalist program very well. I have a coworker, Tanya Homayoun, who may have done a program for you in the past, I don't know, but you may have met her. She's been here about 3 years, I think. And then we also have a wildlife diversity outreach specialist, Olivia Hahn, who does a lot of the videos and does that kind of work to help promote the work that we do. And basically what we're charged with is, as it says there, we help track the status of wild populations of plants and animals throughout Texas. What we do to accomplish that is we reach out to community scientists all over the state of Texas to take part in those activities in collecting that data. And so what we serve kind of as a middle ground between the naturalist community, you all out there, even myself, but you all out there, and then through using Inaturalist primarily now, we then can gather data and information about the flora and fauna of the state of Texas, and then we get that information to the research and conservation community so that they can take that information and be able to make good conservation decisions. So that's one of the things that I always stress to people. We can't conserve and manage things if we don't know what's going on with them. And one of the most basic things we need to know about what's going on with them is where they are in time and space and how abundant they are. And iNaturalist is a great tool for identifying those things around the state of Texas. And that's where all of the community scientists that are out there, millions and millions of you, have the potential to help us with that information, whether it's, rare plants, whether it's other species of animals that are called species of greatest conservation need, whatever that happens to be, y'all can help. We do have our own webpage, and you can go there and find out how to get involved, find out the projects that we're involved with, and specifically, these are our 12 projects that we are either overseeing or helping manage. And they range from the rare plants of Texas, you can see right there kind of in the middle, to bees and wasps of Texas, herps, Texas Whooper Watch, which used to be a paper project, is now all done through iNaturalist. We are now monitoring not bald eagles per se, but bald eagle nests around the state of Texas. And then Texas milkweeds for monarchs is another project that is ongoing. So lots of opportunity to become involved through Texas Nature Trackers. So let's get right into the meat of the program here. So there's our little house we bought a couple of years ago now. And when we bought it, this is what it looked like. Front yard right there in the upper left-hand corner picture. In the backyard, you can see. And they're beautiful pictures because, well, first of all, these were taken by the realty people, so they're really pretty. Took them when there's leaves on the trees, obviously in the springtime, it looks like, based on what's happening with those pecan trees in the front yard, just barely leafing out. But you can see that there's a lot of St. Augustine grass. There's some non-native irises. There's a non-native magnolia up against the house, and all kinds of things, most of which was non-native. There is a water feature, a little water fountain in the backyard, but it was broken at the time and wasn't working. And then, of course, you can see those sago palms and some of those other plants that really aren't, they can grow here, but for what we wanted, that was not the vision. But we saw a lot of potential in this little house and yard. It's 0.233 acres, I think, so a very small yard. So most of what we saw, we didn't really want, other than those large pecan trees. Except now, those large pecan trees, by the way, attract an awful lot of squirrels. So they're a challenge in their own right. But we had everything from purple heart, liriope, vinca, Asiatic dayflower, garlic, all kinds of things that a lot of people would like. We, though, however, wanted to go native. So we did definitely have a different vision for this yard. And so one of the things that when I teach programs about using native plants, I talk about all these different considerations you should have when you get to start the process. And I thought, well, this is a great way for me to practice what I preach. So I wanted to review these with you a little bit. What do you already have? So one of the things that we did is that first fall, late fall into the spring, I watched to see what came up in the yard. So we had windflower, anemone. We had dandelions. We did have false dayflower. So in a patch kind of hidden in the yard. So we had a couple of things. Not that dandelion is not native, but really for the butterflies, any butterflies that would come to that yard, unfortunately, dandelion was the big attractor. But we wanted to inventory what we had, both the things that we didn't want to keep and the things that we did want to keep. I'm a huge believer in using native plants in these kind of efforts. And a lot of it is they're used to the growing conditions. They also, the pollinators, the bees and the wasps and the flies and the butterflies and the hummingbirds, they're adapted to these plants. So why not take advantage of that and marry those together? I will tell you, right across the street from our house is Cibolo Creek. And so our soil, I haven't hit a rock yet in our soil. It's deep in the front yard. It's sandy loam. In the backyard, it's got a little more clay to it. It's farther away from the creek. But so we're operating some really extraordinary conditions. I grew up in Iowa, so for me to dig in soil in Texas and not find a rock is pretty amazing. One of the things that I wanted to do when we started selecting plants is I wanted to make sure that I was picking plants that really were efficient for pollinators. And what I mean by that is things like composites. So different kinds of daisies, plants in the Compositae family, because they have those heads of flowers so pollinators can sit and drink a lot without having to be constantly flying around looking for things. And it's not just composites, but certainly that's one group of them that is, the flowers are structured that way. And then I wanted a variety of different kinds of flowers. So I wanted tubular flowers that are great for bees and beetles and flies. And then other things, different colors. Obviously, colors would be very important to attracting different things. You know, a lot of people plant red flowers thinking the only thing it attracts is hummingbirds. It actually attracts a surprising number of butterflies. Red flowers do, and especially in the fall. But you want to have deep flowers and shallow flowers. So, and what I mean by that is some insects don't have a very long proboscis, so they need flowers that they can reach that are shallow. And then you have others like moths and butterflies that have a very long proboscis by comparison. They can get down farther into those tubular, more tubular type flowers. Another consideration, we wanted to make sure we had things that started blooming in the earliest spring and went all the way until the snow flew, basically. So we wanted to make sure that we had a collection of things that started in February and went all the way into November. And in fact, right now, I've got already, I have a couple of things blooming in the yard, which shocks me even after the little bit of snow we got the other day. So that's one of our goals. And there were times as we have followed everything, I've followed everything very closely. And each week I would count how many flowers I had blooming in my yard at any one time, different species. And that ranged anywhere from 15 to all the way up to about 35, depending on the time of the year, most of those in the spring and early summer. But we always had something flowering, very, very important. And then also, the more diverse the flower shapes and designs and sizes, the more diverse the pollinators. And then also different plants, or different heights of plants. So we wanted some close to the ground. We wanted some that are 3 or 4 feet tall. And we even had some that were 8 to 10 feet tall. And you'll see what I mean by that in a minute. Also, where we could, we wanted to make sure we selected plants that had dual purpose. They could be providing nectar for the pollinators, but they could also be host plants for certain butterflies or even moths that might visit our yard. So that was another consideration to do. And then we've never used and never will use pesticides or any kind of chemicals like that. That's what a digging trowel and a knee pad is for me to get down there and dig those things out. So we try to avoid pesticides or any kind of chemicals at all cost. One of the fortunate things about this house is it had a little greenhouse. That greenhouse was falling apart. All of the wood had rotted. And so last summer, we used it the first winter to actually plant everything. I went out, did a lot of seed collecting in roadside ditches and got seeds from friends, and then started growing those plants. I had had some experience with this at a nature center I worked at in Minnesota 35 years ago. And so we would rescue these flats from Walmart where they were going to throw them all away. We were able to talk them into giving us a bunch of those. And then, of course, any plants that we bought, we kept those pots and kept reusing them. So that little tiny greenhouse has become an extremely valuable thing. And that's the newer version of it since it's been fixed. And we have grown, we've germinated somewhere around 60 species of plants in that little greenhouse over the last 2 years. I've already got things in soil right now, and I've got about 6 species that have already germinated, even with the cooler weather. So we're well into our next year of growing things. And if you've not done that before, it's really a lot of fun. I just love growing native plants. And that's a whole different presentation probably, but it can be a lot of fun. So here's what the front yard looked like before we began. And then by last summer, it looked like that. Sorry for everything looking so green, but nice to see it all green. So what we did, first of all, we knew we were going to have deer issues. There were huge numbers of axis deer and white-tailed deer in our neighborhood and down in the creek bottom. So in order for us to be successful, we knew we were going to have to keep them out. And so you might think, well, a picket fence isn't going to keep them out. I always wanted to have a picket fence, and now I got one. We put that picket fence in ourselves. The reason we did it this way is I didn't think that the deer would jump that fence because the yard was small enough. My argument for this was that deer don't want to be in confined spaces like that. And to this day, we've had that fence up now almost 2 years, going into the second spring. Not one deer has entered our yard. They have not jumped that fence, and there are tons of plants in there that the deer would eat to the ground. So we've been very successful with that. So if you have a smaller yard and you can fence it, you don't have to put up a wall in order to keep them out. Sometimes just the size can control a little bit. Now, I'm not saying that's going to work all the time, but that's the success we've had so far. The other thing we did, if you'll notice on the outside, we already had these huge rocks that were out here by the street. They had some sotol plants. We took 2 sotols that were out by the front windows, moved them out here. The deer don't eat the sotols, or haven't yet. And then we put plants out here like Lindheimer muley that they weren't going to feed on. We put out a whole bunch of mealy blue sage that the deer generally don't eat. We put out woolly ironweed. We put out several other things that the deer have not bothered. So that's been very successful. Lantana, Damianita, just a few plants, and it's worked out really well. And then the tallest plants you can see back there, because this is spring, the ones in the front are cowpen daisy, and the ones in the back are the annual sunflower. And yes, they went nuts, and yes, we probably have too many. But the goldfinches that came in and fed in the wintertime didn't complain did not complain at all. So, but you can see it's kind of a wild scape, in the true sense that it is a wild. It's not I'm not a big believer in, super fancy, this little plant goes here and this little plant goes over here and there's nothing in between them. I want this to be as natural as possible because that's what the critters are finding out in nature. So that's what we tried to accomplish. Here's a looking out the front porch, just to kind of show you where we are. There's the creek across the street, by the way. And then there's a picture across the entire front yard. So what we did is we took that entire right side. That was our sunniest spot because we have all these pecan trees, but pecans kind of give a filtered light, at least these trees do. So we knew we were going to have shade issues, but so far we haven't had that be a real problem because of that filtered sunlight. But we put most of our attention on the right side that first year, a combination of seedlings that grew in the greenhouse, seeds that we just scattered and let them come up, and then plants that we purchased or rescued and put in. And generally we started with just a handful of them, and then they've done their thing. Over in the left side where it's a little more deep shade, we've kind of slowly worked back into the yard. We do have a dog, so we've left a little bit of that yard for her to run around in, but it winds around this front fence there. Here's the front of the house. We've also expanded into the garden on this side of the house by taking out everything that you see there. Somebody just asked the question, what process did you use to remove the grass in the front yard? A garden fork and my hands. Went through, stabbed squares up, and that St. Augustine grass I could then dig up. And again, I had really good soil, so that made it possible. Grabbed hunks of it. It was like pulling out my hair, piled it up, and then found a place to get that grass out of the yard. But it was a lot of manual labor. I didn't use any kind of a tiller or anything like that or chemical at all. In terms of water system, Susan, occasionally if it's extremely dry, I've got a hose and I put watering out. Right now, we don't have like a drip system or anything like that. Most of these plants are pretty well adapted. Last summer, when it got really, really hot, there would be an occasion where I might turn, when I had permission through the city's watering program, where I would turn on the sprinkler at night and give it a good half-inch soaking. And we made it through pretty good. So we've thought about putting in a drip system or something like that, but right now my intention is not to have to do that. So this is the second July. This is last July. You can see the plants there. So in the right section, somebody asked, where are those plants? So the tallest one's clear out here. I don't know if you can see the arrow or not. Those are the common sunflowers. This is a big patch, and they haven't flowered yet because this was taken in July. This is all Maximilian sunflower. Up in here is cowpen daisy. Was able to get some Canada wild rye, so I've got a couple of plants of that in there. I did get some little blue stem, big blue stem Indian grass, side oats grama, and scattered the grasses around, again, to try to mimic a little bit of what the critters might see out in the natural world. Some of the things in front, I've got cone flowers. I've got this bush right here, and there's another one in this corner you can't see. This was a shrubby bone set that anchors that part of the garden right there. But all around here are everything from blazing star to penstemon to blue-eyed grass to goldenrod, a little clump of goldenrod here, Blackfoot daisy, all kinds of stuff in here is mixed in. So, and it tends to move around a little bit. I do have some milkweed plants scattered around in here. And so that's worked out pretty well. And then there's also, and I know a lot of people would think I'm crazy, but there's also snow on the mountain in here. And I wanted snow on the mountain because I knew when it got extremely hot in August and most of these things were not blooming, snow on the mountain would be blooming and would be providing nectar for the bees and the butterflies, and certainly they did. In this front yard up here, we had some extra rocks laying around, so we put this little trail to get to where the watering thing is. You can see I've got a hose running there. Here we had another type of bone set right here. We had some blazing star back here. I will tell you, blazing star does not like a lot of shade. It gets very leggy, so we'll be taking those and moving them out into the sun. You can see the the purple coneflower right here. But this is purpurea. We also have angustifolia out in the other part of the garden. And then we had a whole lot of goldenrod right here, and it flowered prolifically all summer into the fall. And it's actually blooming right now, a couple of small plants. And then we also got some native vines. So there's some alamo vine here mixed in with, now I'm gonna screw up and forget the name of it. It's, what's the Gulf fritillary like to lay its eggs on? Passion vine there. So we actually did want some vines in the yard again to try to reflect more diversity. So that's kind of what we have there. And then in this front, this is all stuff that, and remember the fence goes just on the other side of this right here. Here's where we're starting to add things. So we've got some native shrubs. I've got some in the corner. I've got a small redbud tree with some rock rose. We've got beautyberry here. And a variety of things. As we find things, we just fill in holes and see what happens. We had a couple of these old logs, cedar root stocks. We've grown Lindheimer Morning Glory up on that, and it looked beautiful this fall when it started flowering. So again, just trying to fill in the gaps as we go along. And then this front part over here, which would be on this side here, again, lots and lots of variety. I do have to say thank you to Susan Bogle, because a lot of these plants is a result of her generosity. So in terms of how aggressive blue-eyed grass is, I haven't had a problem with it at all. I love that plant. It provides early spring flowering. I wish I could grow more of it actually. So I have not had any negative experience with blue-eyed grass. I really like it. And somebody asked, do I add mulch? The only thing I add is in the fall, I take all those pecan leaves and I cover the garden beds with about 2 inches of mulch of the pecan leaves and stems. And then in the spring, I'll start to move those around a little bit. They break down pretty well. And I know some people might think, well, doesn't that inhibit the growth of the plants? And we have had no issue with that. I don't get rid of my leaves because they're energy that was taken out of the soil, and I want to put it back into the soil best I can. So that's worked out really well for any kind of mulch. So I don't buy any kind of mulch specifically for the garden. And here's the front of the house, this big anchor rock right here. This was a magnolia. We actually, you'll see in a little bit later, we took that magnolia, cut it out because it was going to grow into the house, and it actually left a stain of dark behind it on the wall of the house. We've never been able to get that out of there. We've actually turned that into a bird feeding station. I'll show you that here in a little bit. So here's the front yard. Again, we took that rock and kind of anchored. I actually put dewberry around that rock. It's growing great. Put some I tell you what, the one thing I'll tell you, once you get cowpen daisy, don't worry, you don't have to get another seed of it because you'll have a lot of it for a long time. We put some cowpen daisy over here to add some color. And then again, just filled in with a wide variety of things. A lot of them were seedlings. Here's another example of one of those old cedar roots that were using as a thing to grow vines up. I also put a trellis over here for some native honeysuckles. But again, just a variety of plants, and I'll show you kind of that laundry list. In the front, we wanted to put an extra barrier besides the picket fence for the deer. So you got these rocks, you've got this thing. So they've got to make a jump from here to go all the way over that fence to get into there. And because it's so rank with growth, we've been fortunate that hasn't happened. And again, we did that on this side of the driveway as well. In the backyard, the first thing we did is we took out all these palms and things. They're kind of beautiful. One thing I noticed is we were chopping these down. And by the way, they're really hard to do. It's like cutting shredded paper. They are full of roaches. Underneath all those scales are full of roaches. So if you ever get into that and start digging those out, don't be surprised by what jumps out of there. So here's what it looked like before. Here's what it looked like after. You might think it looks pretty barren, and at that point it did. But we started adding things in. First of all, we got this water feature to start working. And now on a winter's day, we'll get anywhere from 200 to 300 at least cedar waxwings watering in the yard, and attracts a lot of other bird activity as well. We've had eastern bluebirds back here in the yard, and hermit thrushes, and golly, just an unbelievable collection of things. Here's the second year. So this was the first year. This was full of vinca. We hand dug that vinca out of this entire patch. It has never come back in the 2 years we've been there, which is awesome. But what we did is we started planting that with a variety of things. I knew some of these things weren't necessarily going to be loving the shade, but they've done pretty well. We've got everything from Texas milkweed right here to flowering in the spring was pink evening primrose as a ground cover. We've got Turk's cap right here. We've got some asters, native asters growing back in here. I put a Caroline buckthorn in the front yard. This is a rusty black haw, beautiful. And by the way, if you're looking for a native shrub that turns a spectacular color in the fall, late fall, it holds onto its leaves a long time, that rusty black haw puts on incredible orange red leaves. Just amazing, and they last for a long time. So that's that little corner of the yard. Then we took this little patch right here, turned it into this. There's the old greenhouse. You can see how rotted the old wood is compared to the door I had to replace. We also put in another water feature here, but again, we have everything from columbine to buttercup to some violets right in here, and a variety of other things. I did put in inland sea oats. Now I'm going to be, if anybody needs any, I have plenty. That's one of the things I'm learning through this process, is what spreads really quickly and what doesn't, but that's okay. I mean, what the heck? It's awesome. In the backyard, we have this vine that belongs to the neighbors. It's when it flowers, the butterflies go crazy for it, but it tries to take over my yard. So we're slowly pushing it back. There's a fence back there, believe it or not. And it's also grown down along here and covered up this wooden post here. So the first thing we did is cut that back some. We took that tree and turned it into a bird feeding station where we hang our bird feeders. It's just stuck on the ground, and I've got rebar attached to it to keep it up. We created a brush pile, by the way, back here in the corner. It now in the wintertime hosts all kinds of native sparrows, as well as some house sparrows. And then I also took an area right here. This is a fig tree. And what I did is I took some native shrubs, and I've started planting in here with the idea that eventually this fig tree will go away. And some people say, why would you cut down a fig tree? It produces all of these huge beetles, fig wasps, I think they are, that are, I mean, everywhere in the yard. And I personally, I mean, they're really cool looking beetles, but eventually we want to have native plants like evergreen sumac, and I've got 3 wafer ashes here that'll grow up. And the nice thing about the wafer ashes, they're a host for giant swallowtails, for 2-tailed swallowtails. So that's a much better alternative. We also just where we could find places, this was a rock wall that was around this tree. This is now my big stand of frostweed. Does great there in the fall, and we've got a little stand back there against the fence there. We actually, someone gave us, Wilt Shaw gave us a witch hazel. It's growing marvelously well right there in the shade, and has beautiful flower, leaves in the fall. It's already flowered once this winter. And then in the back, we carved out a little area after we got rid of all the vines. We had erected this wooden fence here as a privacy fence. We're now growing Virginia creeper up here. We've got a variety of small shrubs and vines back in here. And then I've got a Mexican plum right here, and growing on that is snapdragon vine. So again, we've tried to find as many different things as we can. And we know that a lot of these things are going to die off after time. But again, as I'm collecting seeds, we can continue to enhance, and we're learning what grows where. We also took a bunch of rocks that were still on the property randomly or down in the ground, and we turned it into a water feature that now, and then we've planted around that. So this is tall white aster that blooms in the fall. We've put a false indigo bush back here. We just started growing in this little patch right here, some bushy blue stem. And then we've got a couple of native plants growing in here that grow down in creek bottom. So things are coming along. Things are coming along. So the evolving results, we have got, I'm not going to go through all this list, but those are all the native plants, woody plants that we have, shrubs and trees. Basically what I'm trying to do with all of this woody plant stuff, when we bought our house, there was no understory, there was no shrub layer, there was only a canopy and a very depauperate ground layer. What this is going to do is create a shrub layer over time. It's going to create a sub-canopy understory area. And that's what we want, because we're also trying to attract birds and other wildlife, and they need all of those layers. If you're just going to have top and bottom, you're missing all that ground in between that all those other birds feed on. So already we've seen incredible numbers of warblers that visit the yard in the springtime. Now, granted, we've got a creek across the street that helps. But all of these eventually, as they get larger and larger, are going to be producing more flowers, more fruits, or attracting more wildlife. We also, again, have a variety of vines that are providing additional cover and flowers for things. These are just kind of groupings of the different kinds of forbs that we have. We have well over 100 species, not a lot of any kind, but again, it's kind of an experiment in progress. And then we tried to get as many native grasses as we could as well. We've been very successful with that as well. The only one that hasn't flowered yet is big blue stem. So we're waiting for that maybe next year. We have one plant of big blue stem. So here's just to kind of give you an example. These are some of the flowers that are blooming in the yard. You can see the different pollinators that are enjoying those flowers. I take pictures of all these and post them on Inaturalist. Most of them you can't identify down to species, but it's just great to see the yard alive with this. And before we did this, there was nothing like that in the yard. There were no bees. There were very few butterflies that drifted by. There wasn't anything. So this is really, and plus look at all the color. I mean, golly, fantastic. And then here are examples. We documented in 2 summers, now more than 50 species of butterflies in this little 0.23 acre lawn. Alamo vine, we've grown that. We've got really good soil. I was growing that in a shady situation, and it flowered prolifically on a trellis all summer. I gathered the seeds of those, and I've now germinated. I think I have 15 plants that I've germinated already in the greenhouse. Good question, Robin. The neighbors, fortunately I live on a dead end. We live on a dead end street. I have one neighbor to my right who's a rentor, and their house is an extra lot away, so that it's not really a bother to them. The other house across the street is on the street corner. They don't pay attention to anything. Then I have the creek bottom, and I have my neighbor to the left who owns the creek bottom. And at first she probably thought we were a little nuts. But the awesome thing now is she is like amazed at what she's seeing in the yard. I do a lot of Facebook Lives through our TNT page. She's now a big watcher of those TNT live broadcasts. She is interested in the birds coming to her yard now. So we've converted her. She may not ever do this, but she's not fighting us on it like you would see. Plus, I would also say that we don't have any one of those crazy neighborhood association rules. We don't have any of that, so we don't have to fight that all the time. So we're very fortunate in our setting. But here are just a few examples of the butterflies. I even had and Susan, I'll get to your question in a second. Oh my gosh. I had a huge orange tropical butterfly in my yard that just showed up one day that shouldn't be there. So we're starting to see all kinds of fabulous things going on. Lots of different birds. I've had more than 70 species of birds. And these are not birds that just fly over the house. I threw those out of my calculation. These are birds that have been in the yard, either in the trees or down feeding on, and yes, we feed birds, in nest boxes like you see the titmouse there, or nesting in the neighborhood, and they come to the yard, sing, they drink. If you want to have all of these birds and wildlife, water, not watering plants. A water dish will attract more wildlife than anything else you can put in your yard, I swear. So let's see, let me get to the questions here. The size of the yard is 0.23 acres. So it's a typical long, narrow yard. That's all there is to it. Favorite plant, Susan, that you know that's not a favorite question. I don't know how you could ask me that question. But if I had to pick one plant to put in my yard that I would attract the most kinds of things for the longest period of time, it would be mealy blue sage. I would put mealy blue sage in any garden I ever had. It starts blooming in the spring, it blooms all the way to the fall, and it attracts everything. So if I had to pick one, but there's a ton of them that I love, so that's not really a fair question. I have not had flooding from the creek. In fact, the people that we bought the house from never saw flooding up at the house. So it's a kind of a deep floodplain, but obviously over the eons there'd been flooding because you wouldn't have all that sandy soil if that wasn't the case. But so far since we've lived there, we haven't had one of those 200-year, 100-year floods. My water features, one is just a metal, is a big old, thing that has water bubbling out the top. We control that. One of those big concrete things. One of them is just a simple dish that's about this deep, maybe about 2 inches deep. We put some rocks in it and fill it with water. Another one is one of those traditional old concrete bird baths. We put a lot of rocks in there so that they can drink along the edges and then stand in there to take a bath. And then our other water feature, the one I showed you that had all the rocks, we actually went out and bought a 75-gallon one of those plastic tubs you can buy at a hardware store. Built the rocks up around them, put rocks in there, and then kind of put in a filter pump. And then we have to fill it. We have to add water every couple of weeks, but it works out great. It's been a really, really nice thing. Okay, and I see, let's see, actually my anacachos are doing great. I've got them in the backyard. I've got two, and they're doing really well in kind of a light shade. It's in shade, but they get sun in the afternoon, and they seem to be responding really, really well. All right, so then what's next? Because this is an evolving thing. One of the things a lot of people think, you put in a native plant garden, and since they're all native plants, you can just stand back and let things go. Well, that's not the case at all. So I have some plants that will disappear over time. I'm constantly growing seedlings because I can't help myself. So I've got a greenhouse full of seedlings, and will have here in the next few weeks. We're going to continue to weed out remnants of the non-native grass by hand. And that'll always be a process as long as we have any native of the St. Augustine grass. We're going to have to keep working on that. We'll continue to add species where I can from the greenhouse and through purchases, although I don't have to purchase as much anymore. And then we'll move things around. So as things spread, we can take these things and go, well, let's put a little patch of it over here. So we just kind of, move things around as I have a desire to do. We continue to document everything on Inaturalist, and we'll continue to do that. And then we're slowly expanding the garden as we can within the limits that we have. And then what I spend a lot of time doing in the fall is I sit in my folding chair with my camera and I take a lot of pictures. And I'll be out in the garden in the front yard for 3 or 4 hours, just sitting there watching the life that's going on around me. So that's the thing. If you do this kind of work, don't forget to enjoy it. So let me talk real briefly here about iNaturalist and how we use it. iNaturalist, of course, is an app for documenting plants and animals. and biodiversity, if you will. It was created out in California by some graduate students. The idea behind Inaturalist is connect people to nature, and then also to generate scientifically useful biodiversity information. And that's what we train a lot of people around the state of Texas to do in my job, to try to get them to participate in this process. The little blue stem plants flowered, they transplanted well, and they bloomed this fall. So I had them. It was awesome. Just get enough roots, as much root as you can, and then baby it for a while to keep it going. So basically, you go out with your phone, you take a picture, you share it on Inaturalist. They'll help you identify it, or the app will help you identify it. But the great thing about this is it's a way to record what you're observing in that space and time. And one of the things, how we've used it, is we created our own project. And it's called Cibolo Cottage. I am into bison, so that's why it's called that. And we live on Cibolo Drive. And you can see by this thing, this was probably in the last couple of months, I've made 428 observations, all plants and animals so far, 262 species in a 0.32 acre yard. A lot of diversity, and of course, a lot of that's been planted. But this is a great way, a couple of reasons I do this. Every time I see a plant bloom the first of the year, I take a photograph and document it. So I'm gonna have duplications in here of the species, but this way I can go back and I can start to learn the phenology of my yard, what's coming and what's going, what butterflies, or when can I expect to see this butterfly or that bee or those birds, whatever it is. So I try to document everything I can through my iNaturalist project in the Cibolo Cottage project. So now let's talk, we've got a little bit of time before questions. I want to talk about specifically some of the native plants that I use and that I really recommend for pollinators and butterflies. And I know there are people from all over the state, so some of these might not apply to your part of the state, but I saw Dallas and of course Bernie and Guadalupe County and other places. So hopefully this will give you an idea of what you can use. A lot of these are pretty adaptable. So the mist flowers and bone sets, these are generally late summer to fall bloomers, super attractive for monarchs and queens. There are two species that we have around here. There's the Gregg's blue mist flower, which is what most people plant in their yard. It's it's found mostly in the South Texas plains, Chihuahuan desert. But it grows really well here, so we plant it a lot. You can find it in the stores a lot. The native one that grows in creek bottoms around here is called blue mist flower on the left. It grows from 1 to 4 feet tall. In my yard, it's actually doing better than the Gregg's mist flower. So I've got both of them there, and both of them are flowering, but you can see it grows in the Edwards Plateau, San Antonio, the Piney Woods, prairie savannas, cross timbers. It blooms, and it does like shade and blooms just fine in the shade, and it will attract butterflies just like the Gregg's mist flower will do. A little bit different leaf. The leaf isn't as divided, but the flowers look very, very similar. And I'm currently trying to grow both these in my greenhouse, so we'll see how we do. Another bone set that I truly love, and this is the woody plant I would suggest if you're trying to attract butterflies, especially in the fall. By the way, that's a great purple hair streak, pretty little butterfly, isn't it? Shrubby bone set, Agritina, about 6 feet it can grow to. You can trim it back in the wintertime and get more flowers in the next fall. You can see where it grows there. It will begin to bloom in May, but it really mostly blooms the best late summer into the fall, and everything is attracted to it. I mean, everything comes to it. The butterflies, the moths, the bees, the flies, the beetles. It is its own ecosystem, and it's absolutely gorgeous for what it attracts. And then here's my mealy blue sage, as I talked about being one of my favorite plants to put in the yard. And Catherine is right, Agritina havanensis is fantastic. If you're growing in this area, mealy blue sage really does great. It's found throughout Texas, actually. And again, it blooms early and goes on and on throughout until October and into October. If you're growing up in the, it does grow in the Edwards Plateau, but the Gulf Coast, Piney Woods also has a really good distribution, is giant blue sage. The mealy blue is a little easier to find. The giant blue I don't have in my yard, but I highly recommend it where I've seen it growing in other parts of the country where I live. It is a magnet for butterflies, especially. A couple of coneflowers that I am a big fan of. Purple coneflower, purpurea, of course, isn't actually native here where I live. It's more native to actual prairie lands, but it grows very well here. A taller version that does grow around here is angustifolia, pale purple coneflower. Notice the flowers the ray flowers dip a little bit more or droop a little bit more. They're paler. Beautiful flower. And I sat for one day for about, I suppose, 2.5 hours focused on that flower right there, just photographing different things coming to feed to nectar on it when it was in bloom. So wonderful, wonderful plants. Pretty easy to grow in a pot, actually, from seed. You might have to treat it for 6 weeks, then put it in a refrigerator, moisture in a refrigerator, moist sand to winter treat it, but it does really well. I really like both of those. Another favorite is Liatris or blazing star. This is the native species we have here. If you're up by the Dallas area, if you can get a hold of gay feather pycnostechia, or however you say that, Liatris pycnostechia, that is spectacular. It grows 4 to 5 feet tall. Absolutely fantastic. This grows lower to the ground, does really well in dry soils, and blooms in July, August, and attracts a lot of butterfly activity as well. Bee balm, there's different kinds of monardas. If you're up in the Dallas area, wild bergamot, oh my gosh. I grew up with this up in Iowa where I grew up, in Missouri where I've lived. Spectacular, smells beautiful. It grows to 6 feet tall up in Iowa. Down here, maybe 5 feet tall. Attracts all kinds of butterflies and bees. In the drier parts of the state, you can get spotted bee balm. I think it's a beautiful flower, kind of yellowish. Also is great. And then around us where I live, horseman or lemon bee balm. Some people might think it gets weedy, but I love the plant. Plus, it's just so fragrant. The leaves are. It's a great little plant for getting going. And then, of course, prairie verbena, very popular. Again, another one of those that grows or flowers over and over and over again from spring to fall. I've had mine die back, and then without me doing anything, all of a sudden I look and it's come back to life. So it, again, attracts a lot of butterflies. And then a seasonal one is basket flower. It grows in a lot of roadside ditches. One flower head there can have as many as 125 seeds in it. But it is a wonderful plant. Blooms in May and June, attracts especially large butterflies to it. And I just think it's a pretty plant. I just think it's just a lovely thing. So I strongly recommend that one. And then, of course, when we talk about thistles, we have a lot of non-native thistles that are a real hassle. But we also have the Texas thistle, which is a native thistle. It's smaller, a little bit more polite, if you will, even though it'll still stab you to death if you fall on it. But you can see it grows in large areas of the state, blooms April through July. And when it's in bloom out in fields, the butterflies go crazy. It doesn't seem to spread like our non-native thistles. It's a little more under control because it's got that native plant competition. But I show you all those photographs because, again, when I say it attracts everything that is out there looking for nectar, that is no joke. Everything goes to that flower. So it's, and even if you have an acreage and you have thistles on your property, make sure you're not killing the Texas thistle. It's a smaller flower. You can learn to identify it and separate it from bull thistle and some of the other ones that are more invasive. And then I use different kinds of foxgloves or penstemons. I've got 3 species that I grow in my yard. I've been growing a lot of these from seed as well. The Gulf Coast penstemon was a gift, and it blooms in the spring. These don't attract the butterflies as much as they attract our native bees. So bumblebees and all of the other little tiny bees that nobody knows what the heck their names are except the bee experts. Honeybees visit these flowers as well. And they just have long blooming. They bloom for quite a while. It takes forever for their seeds to form, but I think their dried seed heads look spectacular. And again, they're pretty easy to grow from seed. And then you get into some of the red flowers to attract hummingbirds, but also attract sulfur butterflies, the big yellow butterflies that we see. I've even seen pipeline swallowtails feeding on red flowers, but Turk's cap being a shrub, a nice shrub to grow. We've got several of those in the yard. now growing. They've all flowered, and the hummingbirds love them, of course, and so did some of the butterflies. Standing cypress, whereas Turk's cap is a perennial, standing cypress is a biennial. And we've got a bunch of stands of it that are going to bloom this spring. So we're really, what happened? Somebody's computer froze, I think. Oh, you know what? Hang on. Okay, perfect. So there's two species of salvia that I grow in the yard. One is cedar sage. It grows around here in the Edwards Plateau, grows in heavy shade. And then I also plant a lot of tropical sage. I find that when it started blooming in the spring, it bloomed all the way through the fall. It does spread a little bit on its own. The other thing I love about it is it attracts not only hummingbirds, but lots of different kinds of butterflies. So consider that one really, really neat little plant. All right, so let me click another slide here. And then of course, a couple of standard ones you can put in there, Black-eyed Susan, blanket flower. They both attract some butterfly use and certainly a lot of bees. But these are nice plants, annual and biennial, annual that you can put in to get, again, to fill space to get your garden going. And then here's the goldenrods up north. And even around here, you'd probably find the big tall goldenrod. I don't know that I'd suggest that one as much as prairie goldenrods. Solidago nemuralis grows fairly low, very beautiful flowers. I think a very beautiful plant, grows in really rocky soils. I've got it growing in partial shade too, and it's doing fine. And then the two big ones in the fall are cowpen daisy and frostweed, both super important for monarch butterfly migration. So if you have an acreage and you have these plants, don't get rid of them. Don't spray them. I don't care how bad they look in August when it's dry. These are critical plants to the migration of monarch butterflies through our part of Texas. I can't stress that enough. These are wonderful plants, and they're easy to grow, actually. And I should tell you that let me go back one. Let's see here. Cowpen daisy is an annual, whereas frostweed is a perennial. So keep that in mind as well. And frostweed does transplant really nice. Maximilian sunflower, another good fall one, grows very tall. It does spread like crazy in good soil, so keep that in mind, but relatively easy to dig out and move when you need to. And then just kind of slowly, we'll end with the milkweeds, of course. Well, I know what that was about, so hang on. My computer's running slow. There are some of the different milkweeds that you can plant. Texas milkweed is great for shade-loving areas. It will grow in the sun. I've seen it growing full sun. Grows in the shades. Monarchs and queens love it. Antelope horn is the most common one we have around here. Milkweeds are challenging to grow by seed, but it can be done. Just watched a great video on that, actually. And then green milkweed is a close relative of asperula, of antelope horns, but it has more egg-shaped leaves, a little bit different flower, and it grows in a little bit wetter soils. And then finally, a couple of other milkweeds that should be considered would be butterfly milkweed. That's not tropical milkweed, by the way. I would not recommend that. Butterfly milkweed is fantastic, especially in tallgrass prairie regions. Swamp milkweed grows along our river systems. If you have an area that's a little bit wet in the yard, try growing that. Beautiful, 5 to 6 feet tall, spectacular for butterflies. Both of them very, very good plants. And then this is some Erengo and rattlesnake master. I've actually taken that out of the slide program, but you could try those as well. And then I'm not going to show you that because it won't play. There you go. Sorry for that interruption of the flow of the program. But if you've got questions, let me see if I can pull up the chat. And I will stop my screen sharing now. There we go. And let's see here.
I think you got most of the questions.
Did I? Okay, great. Okay, excellent. Well, I hope that was worthwhile for everybody. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all this evening.